Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scriptorium's webcast today, Content Strategy versus the Undead. I'm Gretel Kinsey, and I will be hosting, and our presenter is going to be Bill Swallow. And if you'd like to follow along on Twitter, we have the hashtag CS versus Undead. So just before we get into this, a few housekeeping items to note. Everyone is muted except for the presenter. If you have questions, please take a moment to locate the questions area in the webcast interface. We will be tracking your questions throughout, and then there will be a section for questions at the end. And this presentation is being recorded. The attendees will not appear in the recording, but all of you will receive an email in the next day or two with a link where you can find that recording, and it will be posted on Scriptorium's blog as well. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our presenter. Bill, are you there?
I am.
Hello.
Hello, thanks, Gretel.
I'll go ahead and turn things over to you and let you get started.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Swallow, and I'm a technical consultant with Scriptorium Publishing. I've been with Scriptorium for about 1.5 years now and have been a strong friend of Scriptorium for quite some time. My interests specifically include content strategy and technological implementations, as well as localization and internationalization issues. So when we talk about content strategy versus the undead, well, why the undead as a subject? Well, it seems that with all the reasons and all the many demands for undergoing a content strategy implementation, there are certain things that pop up that aren't unlike battling the undead. They just won't die. Time and time again, things pop up that need to be wrestled, need to be wrangled, and just when you think that you have everything under control, something else related or the same issue pops up again. So I'm going to take some time to try to relate some of these kind of show-stopping issues to various forms of the undead, and hopefully you'll be able to recognize some of your own. So first, well, let's talk about zombies. Zombies, well, usually in pop culture, they're slow-moving, they're clumsy, fairly mindless, running around looking for brains. They are very contagious. You bite, if you happen to be bitten by a zombie, then you potentially could become a zombie. They're fairly destructive. They don't necessarily care about things in their environment. They only have that one-track mind of must get brains, must get brains. And they don't necessarily communicate well, often in grunts, gurgles, and the occasional monosyllabic response. And while Hollywood makes fun of these zombies and scares us with these zombies, we actually do encounter them in our own world in one way or another. Within the content strategy world, we often see zombies as representative of a really unbudging attitude. Someone who personifies not letting go of the status quo. They don't want things to change. They want to continue to repeat the same actions. Perhaps, you have this mindless cut and paste kind of mentality toward getting work done, and they don't necessarily want to change from that very mindless and comfortable way of working. They're very resistant to any kind of change that you might put out there. But not all zombies are bad. And I don't know if many of you are zombie movie aficionados, but even if you're not, check out this movie. I think you'll find it to be quite enjoyable. It's about a boy and his pet zombie, and things, interesting things happen. But, because zombies aren't all that bad, they're just usually misunderstood. They have very good intentions, and they have very valid reasons for resisting change. They may not be coming from the same direction that you might be if you're implementing a content strategy. They may have very specific concerns in mind, something that might be extremely customer focused, and they have spent an awful lot of time and energy in doing things a certain way to achieve a certain result, and they may just not see how that's going to work within a new content model, for example. So these are things that we need to keep in mind, that not all zombies are bad, not all behavior is bad necessarily, and there's usually a very sound reason for this type of behavior. So when battling your zombies, I have a few tips and tricks for survival. First of all, and some people may contend this point, but don't shoot them in the head. It's messy. HR may not like it. And in generally, it's just a poor way of approaching a situation where you have someone who is resistant to change. To put things another way, you don't want to shuffle them to the side. You don't want to bypass them. You don't want to remove them from the situation in any way, shape, or form without first getting in and figuring out why the behavior is present, what's driving it, and if there are valid reasons behind it that can be eventually applied back to the content strategy to kind of make things better overall. Definitely find what drives them and try to harness that as much as possible, because your zombies, well, they are likely to be your strong champions as well, because once they can see exactly how things fit in, how their concerns fit into the overarching strategy, they will champion that to get it done. The next form of the undead that I'd like to talk about a bit are vampires. Something that has been around in Hollywood for close to 100 years now, if not a little longer. I think the first film came out in the late 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. But traditionally, vampires are your bloodsuckers. They come out at night. They're very charismatic. They lure you in, hypnotize you in some respects, and ultimately they're out for your blood. And they have a very strong fear of daylight, among other things which some movies and some folklore contend that, for example, garlic or crucifix or stake through the heart might deal with these creatures. Not necessarily the case overall, but for the most part, they definitely shun daylight. And even in modern movie context, they shun daylight. Daylight maybe not so much because it burns them or destroys them, but maybe it just happens to show that they sparkle a bit, and they don't want to necessarily reveal that. So vampires in the content strategy world are kind of your real charismatic opponents, or charismatic hurdles that you need to get across. And there are really two distinct varieties. You may have someone within your organization who has a very different plan. They might be working against your intended content strategy. They may have their own agenda that they're trying to promote, and sort of get to leadership to bypass what it is that you're trying to do. And on the flip side, you may actually have a situation where you're dealing with a very persistent vendor who is adamant that their solution fits your needs 100%, but they may not necessarily be listening to all of your concerns, all of your needs, and being able to relate that to all of the capabilities that their product or service provides. So here I have a few tools for your success in fighting off your vampires. This particular image actually came from one of Anne Rice's collections of vampire hunting tools. But in our case, our biggest tool for success is going to be preparation, and making sure that we've done our own homework to make sure that the content strategy reasoning and the direction is sound. It has to be strongly rooted within company's goals or the organization's goals. If it's not, it's going to fail. If you can't tie it back to the company's bottom line and bottom reason for doing business the way they do business and the way they need to do business, you're not going to succeed. The stake through the heart when fighting any of these vampires is to shift the focus back from their current argument to the core intent of the strategy. And again, bringing up all of the benefits of the strategy and how that relates back to the company's bottom line. And it's not to sound too literal here, but you shed light on the vampire, shed light on the subject, and it drives them back. Once you really bring up all of the necessary requirements for success for your content strategy, they need to be able to respond to those, and if they cannot, then they are defeated. So now let's talk a little bit about mummies. Mummies are an interesting form of the undead. They're more decoration than anything else until something happens to summon them. And when they are summoned, they are relentless, they are determined, and they will not subside until some kind of curse is lifted. And our own mummies within the content strategy world are just as dedicated and just as determined, as we'll see. Mummies in the content strategy world are really advocates of existing tools, workflows, infrastructure, things that have been around a while and have served a very strong and very valid purpose in the organization. They're very protective of what these tools and methodologies represent, both for them and for the company. They have a strong history with using them, they have a strong history of supporting them, and they don't necessarily want to see them go away. They could be very vocal about it, or they could be very silent about it, working in the background a bit subversively to make sure that what they have invested much of their time and energy in does not go away. So, how do we deal with these? We need to somehow find a way of lifting the mummy's curse. And the way to do that is to really give them a sense of fulfillment, and it's not artificial. There really never is an artificial way to deal with mummies. You have to face the fact that, yes, they are very strongly advocating the existing system for pretty valid reasons. It's served a purpose. It's helped the company. You've perhaps used technology that they're supporting and that they're endorsing for a decade or more. But they see the writing on the wall with using that, and they're a little apprehensive about moving because they have something that works, they know how it works, they know how to fix it, but they're not exactly sure how they're going to transition their knowledge and ability to whatever new model it is that's going to be implemented. So always reference what they've been doing, and definitely make sure that when you address it, that you address it positively, because it is pretty much their pride and joy. You have to acknowledge the success that it's brought to the group using it, to the organization as a whole, to show the return on investment that's been met time and time again by using that particular tool, and acknowledge that you really need to move on and take what they know and apply it forward. So get all of the things that they've learned, all of the mistakes that have been made and been countered and been pretty much bulletproofed from that point forward, and make sure that that type of mentality and the lessons learned there are applied going forward so the same mistake is not made twice. And speaking of making mistakes, let's bring up our next form of the undead, which is Frankenstein's creature. Not Frankenstein himself, though. Well, Frankenstein himself was a bit of a monster himself. We'll get to that in a moment. So Frankenstein's creature is this giant lumbering mass that was brought to life by Victor Frankenstein, cobbled together from bits and pieces of various other bodies and whatnot, and was given a mind and a brain. So it does have a mind of its own, and it's widely misunderstood. There was some wild speculation that went into building this creature from the onset, and it not necessarily lived up to that specific expectation. They did not expect it to quite have as much of its own mind and mentality and needs, wants, and desires than it did. And of course, Frankenstein's creature was a very man-made creature, and it was a product of science and technology. So let's talk a little bit about the relationship between Victor Frankenstein and the creature. So Victor Frankenstein knew just enough to be very dangerous. He was very overconfident in his abilities, and he was adamant about finding a way to cheat death. And if it wasn't for Victor Frankenstein, this creature wouldn't have ever existed. It's a blatant misuse of knowledge, of technology, of science, and it's a lesson learned that you may not always be able to control what you create. And as horrifying as the creature may be, it's a direct reflection of Victor Frankenstein's kind of ignorance of the fact that things may not turn out the way he intended. And we have a recurring theme when we read Frankenstein, when we watch the movies, that ultimately, and it really comes out in The Bride of Frankenstein, that the creature ultimately realizes that they should not exist in the first place. There is no place in this world for them. So in order to combat them, if you have your own creatures to wrangle, you need to really include it in your strategy to make sure that you don't make the same mistakes twice. It's not necessarily incorporating the bad and the good and whatnot, but it's learning from what you've done. This can be in the form of, let's say, you had a bunch of one-off requirements for producing various forms of documentation or various deliverables of some kind, and you had a very specific way of bending a tool in ways that it may not have been intended to produce those results. So using RoboHelp, for example, to produce a very, very specific form of output that really wasn't even intended, some kind of hybrid between maybe an online help format and a printable document. Just to put an idea out there that it's probably a bad idea to begin with. But it's taking a technology and really misusing it. And not so much just misusing it once, but being able to build an entire workflow around an incorrect approach to a solution and perpetuate that through many, many iterations of using this tool. So these are the things that we need to keep in mind and make sure that we do not repeat the same mistakes. We need to learn from the mistakes that we made, learn that creating this creature was a bad idea, and not doing it a second time. In short, don't be a mad scientist. Our final form of the undead that I'd like to actually introduce are ghosts. And ghosts are a very interesting phenomenon. We know them as spirits, specters, apparitions, things that go bump in the night that we can't necessarily explain. They're haunting. Often they come with a very unsettling feeling, a sense of dread, a sense of hypertension that builds within you, that you just feel like you're being watched, that something is there, potentially dangerous, potentially hazardous, but you really can't get your arms around it. And that's essentially what they are in the content strategy world as well. And they really manifest from mistakes and regrets. And I know myself, I've had many over the years that I just had to work through. Ideas that sounded good at the time ended up not so well, and you learn from that, you apply it, and move on. We carry all of these ghosts with us. Unfinished work, things that we really wish we had the time to finish but just couldn't quite get to it. Things changed, directions changed. You had a great idea and you missed your opportunity to make it shine. All of these things can live with us and can kind of weigh us down when we're trying to move forward with something new. You have all of these nagging thoughts in the back of your head that says, well, remember when you tried this a few years ago, or you tried something very similar and you just couldn't make it work, and how much that let you down and so forth. You have to kind of put all of that aside and keep your ghosts in check. Now, you don't necessarily need to be running around with proton packs to do that, but don't give in to the regret that you might have about doing something wrong. And if you make a mistake in your current content strategy implementation, it's not necessarily the end of the world. It's always something that you can fix and something that you can adapt over time. It's the beauty of a content strategy, or any kind of strategy, is that it has to account for the unknown so that it can react to it. And you have to be able to shift gears, and you have to know how the pieces are going to move around in order to shift those gears without grinding them. Don't give in to regret. Don't beat yourself up if you've made a mistake. They happen. Learn from it, pick up, and move on. And you have to be confident in the direction that you chose. And again, it comes right back down to the core reason why you're implementing a strategy in the first place. It's tying it back to the bottom line and making sure that you have that very firmly pressed in your mind, that you have a clean picture of why it is you're doing what you're doing. Day to day, you may get wrapped into the little bits and pieces of the strategy, and they could potentially drive you nuts. But when you keep the big picture in mind, everything falls into place a bit more. Everything starts to make a little bit more sense, and the constant nagging issue that you're fighting today will not necessarily be that big of a deal tomorrow. So at this point, I'd actually like to get an idea from the audience. And I'd like to actually see how many of these undead that you either relate to or that you have dealt with before. You can check all that reply, and we'll give you some time to fill in the poll. And we'll probably give you a few more seconds to wrap up the poll. It looks like we have about 64% people voting so far. And we can go ahead and close that. And it looks like many of us have dealt with zombies and with ghosts. Not so much with Frankenstein's creature. And a good deal of us have also dealt with vampires and mummies in the past as well. So it's interesting that Frankenstein's creature is a bit low. So not too many people have experienced bending a tool incorrectly around a problem, but it's interesting to see that many people are combating zombies and ghosts. Okay. So being a content strategist is kind of like being your own Mystery Incorporated. Maybe minus the talking dog, but I don't know. Your office might be different. So, we, as strategists, we go about investigating and preparing much like the Mystery Inc. would. we build our strategy, we go ahead and we collect all the data points that really define what the strategy needs to look like, who it needs to serve, how it needs to serve up the information, how we need to build and recycle information as needed, and ultimately figure out what people need and tie that right back to the company's bottom line. We don't not only focus on the technology and the capabilities, but we also have to keep in mind as strategists, we have to keep in mind the personalities involved. So thinking back to our zombies, our vampires, our mummies, very, very, very specific personality types. And it's not to say that one person would embody just one or any. They could potentially also embody all of them. But it's important to identify these types of personalities that are involved, as well as the technological hurdles and the business hurdles for getting things done, and be able to respond to them within the context of the strategy. We have to arm ourselves with knowledge and a complete understanding of the strategy's goals in order to defeat a lot of these undead creatures. And so when they arise, once we have all the information that we need and we understand how to identify these personality types, we're very well equipped to then go ahead and unmask these creatures and then reveal them for what they really are. So at this point in time, I'd like to see if there are any questions from the audience.
And we do have a few questions that have started to come in. So just to begin, we had our poll that showed what types were most common from the audience, but as a content strategy consultant, what kinds of undead creatures have you encountered most frequently?
Oh, most frequently, that's a good one. I would say it's a blend of all of them, and probably the ugliest one to deal with is, at least from a consulting side, is Frankenstein's creature, if the intent is to keep the creature alive. Being able to untwist all of the twisted pieces in the creation to streamline an approach is really a challenge. And of course, we meet many different forms of these undead. I do remember working not so much as a consultant, but in a prior job in a prior life, mostly dealing with zombies and vampires as a middle manager. It's really interesting to be able to try to both identify why people hold on to things in a certain way and why they're very resistant to change, and at the same time also be able to apply that not so much to the direction that we want to go, but also keep in mind that there are vampires out there that are looking to completely change the way that that they want your department to work in. So it's been a mixed bag all around with dealing with various forms of the undead, and that's kind of where the idea came from. Was from dealing with so many different issues and personalities over the years that things start to form a pattern in your mind. In this case, they manifested in forms of the undead.
All right. So we have another one that's just asking if you could say a little bit to distinguish mummies from zombies, since both of them are defenders of the status quo.
They are. The big difference between mummies and zombies would be focus and determination, I think, is probably the best way to put it. Zombies have a personal comfort involved. They kind of know how they like to do things, whereas a mummy really is a champion of a particular methodology, a champion of a particular investment that was made by the company years ago, and has very, very strong reasons for why they want to either stick with it or make sure that it can be leveraged as much as possible. before having it see it, see it be kicked to the curb, so to speak. Zombies have a, as I mentioned, I don't want to necessarily keep going back to the mindless cut and paste mentality, but that really comes back to the core of what distinguishes zombies from mummies in the content strategy world. There is a very, this is about me approach with zombies, and there is a much larger, this is about what is good for the company, what the company has invested in, and what we as a group have invested in for many, many, many years, and now you want to change it. There's that kind of divide between the zombies and mummies.
And kind of going along that line with talking about mummies, we have another comment saying one form of mummy that we frequently encounter is the system cobbled together by IT rather than buying a commercial tool. And another form is the insistence that any tool or system we buy has to be customized to fit our every need. So I don't know if you want to maybe just talk about if you've seen situations similar to this and maybe how you've worked to resolve those types of challenges.
Let's see. I need to really think about that question a little bit more. Can you rephrase it a little bit? Or let's see, one more. System cobbled together by IT rather than buying a commercial tool. So you're talking more about the homegrown solution. So from a mummy perspective, if it's a cobbled together system that IT had built, obviously there's some there's kind of a parent-child relationship there that you need to also work on. It's their pride and joy, or it's something that they've invested a lot of time and energy in building. Essentially, they used internal resources to build a brand new product rather than buying one off the shelf or what have you. And I guess it comes back to, in order to combat that kind of mentality, well, we should just, either build on to what we've already built before, or we should just build our own thing from the ground up from scratch now. The real way to look at that issue is really with cost. There's a cost to implement it, there's a cost to develop it, there's also a heavy cost to maintain it, and you have to really ask yourself, are you in the business to do business? Are you in the business to do your company's business, or are you in business to build infrastructure to support your company? And it's a difficult one to answer, but a lot of times you really have to sit back and say, you know what, it's probably a lot more cost-effective to find a third-party tool that gives us the majority of what we need and be able to reconcile bits and pieces of maybe, capabilities or whatnot for a product that's going to be maintained, that is going to be pre-developed and, well, virtually ready to go. I'm not saying, just drop a box and it's good to go, but it may take a lot less configuration time and certainly a lot less development time to get some other purchase tool in place and up and running than it would to cobble something together from scratch on the IT side and implement it. And it's a lot easier to have someone else maintain the upgrades, the bug fixes, and that type of thing, and be able to purchase in an update when you need it, rather than having staff on hand 24/7 year-round to fix all of the little bugs that they didn't think of. And you have to remember that there's a mentality, there's a focus difference. You hire IT in your company to perform very specific tasks that are related to the company's bottom line ultimately. You don't necessarily hire these IT people with the express purpose of building a content strategy solution or a content strategy platform, a component content management system, for example. You're much better off going to a company that specializes in building component content management systems rather than building your own and trying to cobble something together, figuring, oh, maybe if we use SharePoint and kind of tie in Jira and go ahead and bundle in some kind of a publishing engine, and well, we'll see if that happens. I mean, at that point, you're not just dealing with a mummy who wants to sit and invest in internal IT resources, but at that point, you're also creating another Frankenstein's creature. So I don't know if I've answered the question or not, but I've been trying to wrap my head around the question. It's a very interesting one.
And so just one more before we close things out. What do you do if one of these creatures happens to get to your company's leadership before you do? So if the undead wins, what can you do to kind of help mitigate that damage?
Well, that's a really good question. If the undead win, I guess in video game terminology it's game over, but not necessarily. Again, you have to go back to, I think, look, in most cases, if the undead win, it's usually because of a vampire. At that point, someone somewhere along the way had a more convincing argument, had a more charismatic approach to the problem, and talked to the right people using the right terms and the right arguments, essentially to win. And you have to go back to that and then figure out whether or not they also had a very sound strategy, whether they had a very company goal-focused approach. And if they didn't, start to figure out where the gaps are and try to address them. And at that point, remember that you're not dealing with opposition at that point, but now you are becoming the opposer. And essentially you will end up becoming the next vampire, trying to undercut someone else's vision in that regard. So use what you've learned from assessing the personality types that you've been coming across and the issues that you've been dealing with, making sure that you have all of the details, all of the facts, and all of the other necessary information to formulate a strategy that makes more sense than what is being decided.
All right, well, it looks like that's it for today. So thank you, Bill, for all the great information, and thank you for joining us, everyone. And we will see you on the next Scriptorium webcast.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Bye.